48 hostages finally coming home, but not all alive and not without a price. As the IDF pulls back in Gaza, Hamas attempts to fill the vacuum, all while Israel prepares to welcome President Trump for his victory lap. But amid all the fanfare, Gaza may still be far from peace, and the next war may already be starting. Stay tuned for Jerusalem Minute. And welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News, here with Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS in the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem. Alex, this is a very dramatic week here in the state of Israel. 48 hostages, 20 believed to be alive, 28 unfortunately murdered by Hamas, are set to be released on Monday morning, October the 13th by 6 a.m., exactly 2 years on the Jewish calendar since they were kidnapped in the October 7, 2023 massacre, with over 200 Israelis kidnapped to Gaza, held in the dungeons of Hamas. The last 20 set to be freed here, hopefully in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, a lot to unravel here. First, just the return of the hostages, as you mentioned, nearly 2 years to the day on the Jewish calendar from when they were taken, and we can address that maybe at the end. It is believed that Hamas is going to produce 20 living hostages. At some point, there was the feeling that there could be as many as 22 or 24 living hostages. It seems clear that it's 20 living hostages, which means that 28 are dead. There is a belief, I think, amongst most Israelis that Hamas is going to honor at least the first part of this deal, returning 20 living hostages by Monday at the latest, with the possibility that they can come anytime within the 72-hour deadline. Maybe some will be released on Sunday. Not certain if they're all going to be released in the same time, but they all have to be released within the 72-hour window. They will be released without ceremonies like we'd seen in the past. The Red Cross will be ushering them from their locations over to Israel, where Israel has taken some significant steps to prepare hospitals for their arrival, because it is believed that most of these hostages are in very, very poor physical condition.
We've said throughout that Hamas, no way is Hamas going to release these hostages. So what has changed now that Hamas was willing to accept this deal? What's different now this week as opposed to the last 2 years or the last several months in terms of Hamas's position, rejecting every single deal? What's different at this point?
Well, I think that there's two main differences. Number one is the green light that President Trump gave to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF to just go full force in Gaza. And we saw recently in the last several weeks, the IDF enter into Gaza City, which is the largest city with the tallest buildings, and basically just start clearing out civilians and knocking buildings down from the air. And this is believed to be one of the last remaining strongholds of Hamas. And they just see that the IDF is just destroying and destroying buildings. And the situation for all of Gaza, and specifically for Hamas, got a lot worse. The second thing, I think, is Israel's attack in Doha against Hamas leadership. And, you know, the big question once Israel struck was this attack successful or was it not successful? Why? Because it's been suggested that Israel did not succeed to assassinate the targets that it was aiming for in Doha. They did hit some of the top leadership of Hamas. Some of the people that they wanted to strike, you know, have demonstrated that they are still alive. Some I think we haven't even seen yet. But you had a lot of criticism of Netanyahu for ordering that attack, especially if it didn't succeed. And I think, you know, we've gotten used to Israel succeeding in every single attack that it carries out. But it did send a strong message, which is that Israel is willing to target Hamas leadership wherever they are, even in Qatar. And even though the United States has demonstrated that it was not happy, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, that Israel carried out this attack in Qatar, it did send a message to the Qataris and to the United States that you know, Israel is just going all out to win this war, and they all use it as an opportunity to put pressure on Qatar, to put pressure on Egypt, to put pressure on Turkey and others, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia, to put simultaneous pressure on Hamas to at least release the hostages, if not get to a full end of the war, which means the demilitarization of Hamas and the fact that Hamas would no longer be the party that's in charge of running the Gaza Strip.
So the release of the hostages is obviously coming as part of the broader ceasefire deal, which went into effect, I believe it was Friday morning. Netanyahu going live on Israeli television, lauding the deal. Let's check out that video.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו מציינים היום את אחד ההישגים העצומים שלנו במלחמת התקומה. השבת כל חטופינו, החיים והחללים כאחד. זהו יעד מרכזי, יעד שדבקנו בו לאורך כל הדרך. כל מי שאומר שעסקת החטופים הזאת הייתה מונחת כל הזמן על השולחן, פשוט לא אומר אמת. החמאס מעולם לא הסכים לשחרר את כל חטופינו כשאנחנו נשארים עמוק בתוך הרצועה. חמאס הסכים לעסקה רק כשהרגיש שהחרב מונחת על צווארו, והיא עדיין על צווארו.
So the Prime Minister talking about how it wasn't easy getting this deal, securing the release of the hostages, and all of Israel's achievements. So I asked you this last week, I'm going to ask it again. Is this a victory over Hamas? Did Israel win the war? I can just say I already saw images this morning of Hamas gunmen already in different parts of Gaza, celebrating as if they won, taking to the streets, showing that they're still around. Hamas still exists in Gaza. Did Israel win the war? What's your take on that?
Well, certainly the deal that we have is the deal that Israel's leadership wants. Okay, these 20 points are points that were written, at least in part, or fully agreed upon by Prime Minister Netanyahu, by Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. This is the deal they wanted. They wanted a deal which would see all the hostages released up front. The idea of releasing prisoners out of Israeli jails, and we know that there's going to be about 250 prisoners that have been convicted of murder, them with blood on their hands, 135 of them going into Gaza, and then others going back to their places of original residence in Judea and Samaria, into Jerusalem. This is part of the deal, and also the release of many of the prisoners that Israel rounded up during the war. And you can suggest that they were rounded up specifically for this purpose. So this deal where Israel would get back the hostages and Israel would release prisoners, this is the format of a deal that Israel wanted and has wanted for at least a year and a half. I mean, I interviewed Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer in February of 2024, just a few months after the war started. We talked about an endgame, and this is basically the endgame that he laid out. So this is the deal that Israel wants. And certainly Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering this a victory. And I think for Netanyahu and for Israel, you have to look at the deal not in a vacuum, but rather in the scope of the broader war and all of its accomplishments. I mean, Hamas, yes, they're going to be celebrating anything. That's the way they're programmed. They will never admit defeat. They are suicide bombers, which means that they will fight to the last man. It doesn't matter how many losses they sustain. So even if any objective onlooker can say, Hamas, you guys got destroyed here. You got everything handed to you. Hamas will still wave the flag of victory. If they have 20 guys with guns left, those 20 guys are going to be in the street shooting them in the air saying that we won. I mean, so you have to take that part with a grain of salt. But you also have to look again at the wider war. It's not just that Hamas has been filed down in their capabilities by something like 90%, and all the senior leadership of Hamas inside Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Sinwar, Mohammed Def, Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, all these leaders of Hamas have been annihilated, okay? They've been killed. And you're getting back all your hostages, which was a major goal of the war stated by Netanyahu from the beginning. But then you also degraded Hezbollah by something 75–80% in Lebanon, and you've moved them away from your border in the north to the point where Hezbollah no longer poses a direct threat. They are now deterred. In Israel, you see them operating very freely every time, almost on a daily basis, it seems. Every time Israel identifies some weapons cache or some movement of weapons, they're striking over there. And so the hope is that with this deal also that Israel will have that freedom of operation inside Gaza as well. So you have to look at the north and Hezbollah and Lebanon as an example. But then you also have to look at the fact that Bashar Assad is no longer the president of Syria, that Syria no longer has an active military, that Syria is no longer a land bridge from Iran over to southern Lebanon, and that Iran itself does not have nuclear capacity to threaten Israel anymore. So when you look at it in its totality, I think you can see very clearly that Israel has defeated the larger Iranian axis of terror, which includes all the Shiite forces, but also includes the Sunni Hamas. And you also can look at what Israel's done inside Yemen with regard to their attacks on the Houthis and taking out their senior leadership and taking out significant infrastructure in Yemen. So when you look at it in totality, I think you can say that it's a victory. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of people in Israel, especially on the right, that don't necessarily look at this as a victory, to the extent that you had Itamar Ben-Gvir and all the members of his party and Bezalel Smotrich and other members of his party actually voting against this deal in the cabinet.
Right. That being said, I want to talk about practically day to day, and I'm going to use our trusty map here behind us of Jerusalem. Figure we're like right here in the JNS Media Hub here, and 7 minutes away are these neighborhoods here in Jerusalem. And you to mention how many terrorists are being released to Jerusalem?
I think at least 15.
At least 15. I live in Gush Etzion, Judea and Samaria, 100 released, which means I can go out on my porch in the morning and take a look across the valley and basically see the terrorists who were released for some of the most heinous crimes in Israel's history. Are you not concerned on a practical level, on a micro level, for the safety of residents of Jerusalem, residents of Judea and Samaria, and residents of all of Israel, that literally we're 7 minutes away from where 15 very bad, evil people live?
Well, there's serious concern there. We know that Yahya Sinwar and others were released in the deal for Gilad Shalit. I think that deal was in 2011.
Yeah.
Exactly. And at that time, Israel released over 1,000 prisoners in exchange for one hostage.
Right.
Now here we see that the formula has changed, whereby you're talking about the release of about 10, 11 for each one hostage you're getting back, not 1,000 for one. So certainly the formula has been adjusted, but there are people arguing, you know, what's going on over here? The whole concept of releasing prisoners with blood on their hands in exchange for hostages is completely immoral, because if you know that the prisoners being released from jail, they have not been rehabilitated in Israeli jails. They've been continually incited. They have cell phones. They sit together with their other terrorist friends in jail, and it's a badge of honor to sit in the Israeli jail. And we know that many of them go back to committing acts of terror. So if you can calculate, and this is math here because we have experience with this, if you could calculate that 20 Israelis are going to be murdered as a result of releasing these prisoners from jail, how can you possibly justify getting back 20 hostages that have already been taken, you know, in order to see the murder of other Jews later on? And you can't trade blood for blood. So you have a lot of Israelis arguing that this part of the deal is completely immoral. That's number one. Number two, you have people that are questioning the overall leadership of the war to begin with in Gaza. People felt like the only thing that Gaza and Gazans and Hamas respect is if you seize land, right? That you kill Hamas terrorists in Gaza, you've turned them into martyrs. That's an honor for them. The only thing that shames them in their society is if you take their land. And here you see that Israel has not necessarily declared sovereignty over the land. They have taken some kind of buffer zone, which is at least a kilometer wide all around the Gaza Strip, but they're pulling back to lines. At this point, what we can say is with the pullout that it is to about 50% of Gaza. So the IDF is holding right now about 50%. Now, some are reporting that it might be less in practicality than 50%, and that the lines that you've seen on the maps are illustrative, and they're not the specific points where the IDF's actually holding. But the IDF still remains in part of the territory, but people are arguing, how can you cede this territory back to Hamas at all? Because even if there are only a few of them left standing, if the ideology still exists, that they will try to regroup. And the whole idea was that Hamas is supposed to be removed so that they're no longer a military threat, they're no longer a political force, and they will no longer threaten the state of Israel. So if you put them in a position where they can regroup and try to carry out the next October 7th attack, whether that attack is in 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, or whatever it is, that you actually haven't done the job and completed the war.
So yes, you had that withdrawal, as you mentioned, which actually started the clock, the 72-hour period with the release of the hostages and the solidification, if you will, of the first phase of that ceasefire agreement. In the meantime, you had U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and President Trump's son-in-law, senior advisor Jared Kushner, arrive in Israel to oversee all of these steps as they proceed. I know they're still here. They're going to be here. We'll talk about the president's upcoming visit on Monday. Kushner, Witkoff, in a joint press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. And then you had last night, Saturday night, you had Witkoff and Kushner in Hostage Square, which actually has become a symbol not only of those who want to see the hostages released, everyone's hostages released, but that has actually turned into an anti-Netanyahu camp. We've seen it time and time again, and we saw it again last night. Let's check out what happened when Steve Witkoff addressed that crowd there last night.
To Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, let me just finish my thought.
So, Alex, it was supposed to be a celebration that the hostages are coming home, and yes, in fact, it is the mood right now. Please God, those hostages will come home. But that being said, you had people in the crowd booing Prime Minister Netanyahu, booing Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, and applauding Qatar, who's been housing Hamas for years. Steve Witkoff mentioning and thanking the Qataris, the Turks, and all the others who've been involved in the negotiations. But how crazy is that people are applauding Qatar and booing our prime minister in this historic hour, I would say?
Well, I think that there's a lot to unwrap here. I mean, there's the Netanyahu piece, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But first of all, just the fact that Kushner and Witkoff, where are they going? They're not going into Gaza to stand firm in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Okay, they coming to Israel and they're expressing, their solidarity with the people of Israel. So I think everybody can clearly see that the president, his administration stand with Israel, which goes to demonstrate, I think, that the Trump administration did not force this ceasefire deal on Israel, that the Israeli government wanted this deal to happen, and they appreciate the pressure that the Trump administration put on Qatar and Turkey and Egypt and others to get it done. The fact that they came on Sukkot, that before they went to Hostage Square, they went to the Western Wall.
Right.
You saw pictures of Steve Witkoff shaking a lulav and an etrog on Sukkot at the Western Wall before he goes to Hostage Square. You had pictures of Ivanka talking and at the Western Wall, and they were then at Hostage Square on Saturday night. Jared Kushner talking about how he was in tears on October 7th when Hamas committed the massacre, and how close he feels and how proud he is of the resiliency of the Israeli public and taking the moral high ground and fighting this war. So I think that there was a lot to be proud of in the alignment between Israel and this Trump administration. Now, you said that the hostage forum became an anti-Netanyahu venue. It didn't become an anti-Netanyahu, anti-government venue. The hostage forum from the beginning was created by members of what we call the Kaplan protest group. These are the same people that in these 5 consecutive election cycles that we had before this most recent government was formed a few years ago, that they were protesting against the so-called crime minister when they were hoping that the prosecution's cases against the prime minister were going to actually have teeth to them, and they didn't really have more teeth than the headlines every time the prosecution would release details of the investigation to the press. That was the meat that it had. But in the court of law, these cases are proving to be a little bit more than a sham at this point. But they were protesting them, calling prime minister. Then when the prime minister formed the government and he introduced judicial reforms, these were the ones that were trying to shut down the country with major protests on the roads, with the claims from reservists and the Air Force pilots that they would not show up to duty if Israel would be attacked. And then sure enough, Israel was attacked just a couple of weeks later, honestly. And you have to wonder what degree of confidence did those statements give Hamas that now was a good time, that then was a good time to attack the state of Israel. And so this group that created those protest movements, they immediately jumped in from the moment the hostages were taken, and they created the Hostage Family Forum. Initially the head of the Hostage Family Forum was Ronen Sur. He was, one of the political consultants advising Benny Gantz, and when he was challenging Netanyahu to be the prime minister, you have others that were part of this anti-Netanyahu movement, and they jumped in on this hostage forum for a couple of reasons. Number one, to try to restore some credibility with the Israeli public, after they were seen by many as trying to rip the country in half. And then next, when they were hedging that Netanyahu would fail to bring them home, which is why the slogan was chosen, bring them home. The slogan was not chosen, let them go, let my people go. The burden of the hostages was never meant to be on Hamas. They always wanted it to be on Netanyahu because they hedged that he would not succeed to bring them home. Okay, so now fast forward to the point in time where, Netanyahu had already succeeded to bring home 147 of the hostages, most of them alive, some of them dead. Most of those who were dead were killed on October 7th. So they were not being held as living hostages. They were held as bodies.
Right.
Now, some did die in captivity. That's true. Some, but a small portion of the overall hostages that were taken. But now the Netanyahu has cut the final deal to bring the hostages home, all of them. You think that this group is going to congratulate Netanyahu or say, we don't like Netanyahu in general. We didn't like the judicial reforms. We want a different government. But we need to at least give credit where credit is due to Netanyahu for striking Iran, for dismantling Hezbollah, for conducting the war against Hamas, and for bringing the hostages home. They cannot bring themselves to do that. So what are they doing? They have to celebrate a new hero in the story. And the new hero is President Trump.
Yes.
And I think that it's appropriate to praise President Trump for all that he's done. I mean, he's done so much, including giving Israel the restored flow of weapons that was cut off from the Biden administration, giving Israel all the diplomatic support, giving Israel the green light that they did not have when the Biden administration was in place, and in finally putting the pressure on Qatar and Turkey and Egypt, something that should have been done much earlier on in the war, but ultimately is resulting in getting these hostages back. So now you have this hostage forum. They're praising they're praising Trump. They're booing Netanyahu. But what's the irony here? The irony here is that before the war, these people that are now praising Trump, they hated Trump.
Yes,
also.
absolutely.
They saw Netanyahu and Trump as two parts of the same, two cards of the same kind, basically. That these are two peas in a pod, so to speak. That the same things that they were railing about Trump in America and all the things that he was doing over there to harm American society, that Netanyahu was doing in Israel and vice versa. So, but these people, their mission was never to get Trump out of office. Their mission is to get Netanyahu out of office. So they've decided to change their stripes on Trump, and they should change their stripes because Trump was instrumental in all these things to help Israel and to get the hostages home. And I understand that the hostage forum, they'll never vote for Netanyahu, and nobody's asking them to vote for Netanyahu, but at least give the man a little bit of credit for cutting the deal that they demanded that he cut. Remember, these were people who said, end the war now to bring the hostages home. Netanyahu has done that, exactly what they wanted, and they still boo him for doing exactly what they wanted him to do.
Or at least stay quiet. You don't have to boo him. It really looks terrible when you have leaders of a foreign country show up here, show their support. Everything's, headed in the right direction.
And what I hope is that President Trump, who's been so good to Israel and has been so close to Netanyahu, and all these headlines about the rifts between Trump and Netanyahu, I think really have been, just a load of baloney for as long as Trump has been in office in this next term. Let's hope that Trump and his administration see through that. And I think when you look at the thoughtful comments of Kushner and Witkoff in Hostage Square, they did understand the pieces that need to happen in order to get this hostage deal done. Kushner especially, he understood what needed to happen to get these normalization agreements between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco with the signing of the Abraham Accords back in 2020. I think that they're going to be smart enough to read behind the facade here and to recognize that the boos are not coming as a representative of the majority of the Israeli public, but rather part of this small but very vocal minority of individuals that don't want to see Netanyahu be prime minister at any cost, and even are going as willing to go as far as to hijack the hostage forum movement.
Yes.
And protest, shut down streets, call for general strikes, and suggest that this is all going to end up in a civil war, which is what these organizers have done. And for anybody that thinks that the protests are going to go away now that the hostages are home, they should recalibrate, because this hostage forum group, they're just going to go on to the next slogan, and it might be elections now, it might be take responsibility, whatever it's going to be something, because these people, their goal was never to only get the hostages back. Their primary goal is to get Netanyahu out of office.
And seeing what the next rally is about, that will ultimately prove that this was not about the hostages, seeing what the next topic is. It was so bad, by the way, that even blue and white National Unity Chair Benny Gantz took to Twitter, to X, and condemned those who were booing the prime minister.
Yeah, well, Gantz has been the one that kind of hedges between the left wing and
he's good like that,
and the right wing, but that's part of the reason why the left wing has gotten fed up with Gantz, because they see that he plays this sort of like center character, even though, as I mentioned, it was his political advisors who jumped to the head of the hostage forum to begin with. But you see these sites of Witkoff when he mentions Netanyahu, and everybody starts booing, and he said, well, wait a second, let me finish what I'm saying, and then they're boo, and then he's saying, well, look, we have to give some credit to Netanyahu here for his war leadership, and the crowd, they just didn't want to have any part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, let's change gears here. President Trump is scheduled to arrive in Israel on Monday. When I understand, he's only going to be here a few hours, isn't even sleeping over. By the way, I think that's because it's Sukkot, and I want to talk about that also. There are no hotel rooms available. Jerusalem is packed. I don't know if you've been walking around the streets, packed with tourists for the first time, probably since even before Corona, but certainly since the beginning of the war. But let's talk about Trump, his address to the Knesset on Monday. Of course, meeting with the prime minister and all the relevant parties. Also, let's talk about maybe the spiritual perspective of President Trump arriving on Sukkot, exactly 2 years to the day since this all started.
Well, first of all, I don't think that Trump is not sleeping in Israel because there's no hotel rooms. I mean, there was already reports that the King David Hotel was getting prepared to kick the 2 floors worth of guests right out of the hotel.
There's nowhere there for them to go. I talked to some of those people over the weekend. They have no place to go. Thank God Jerusalem is packed, folks.
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's
anyway,
really one of the first times in a long time that there's so many tourists here, with people from abroad, especially American Jews and others coming. And you also have the Feast of the Tabernacles with thousands of supporters from nations all over the world, Christian supporters, evangelical supporters of Israel, coming to be in Israel during the Sukkot festival, which is one of the 3 times in the year where people are supposed to come and actually go to Jerusalem. And they're doing that. But I don't think that this is about the hotel room space. I think that King David would have been very happy to just send all those people that were paying top dollar, out on their tails to welcome Trump to their hotel. But rather, I think this has more to do with the fact that you have government shutdown in the United States, that there is a conference, that's taking place in Egypt, either on Tuesday or potentially Monday evening with Egypt and others. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Trump wants to be at that. So he's flying in because he feels like it's the right thing to do. And he's been invited to speak at the Knesset. He's going to basically touch down here, give an address at the Knesset. We don't know. Maybe he will go to the Western Wall. We're not sure. That's not been announced. He will have a meeting with Netanyahu and his team. He'll probably meet with the president of Israel, Bougie Herzog, and his team, and then take back off to Ben Gurion Airport and then go directly to Cairo. But the fact that he's coming, I think it signals, again, the bond. And we look at the contrast between the beginning of the war, when Israel was attacked. You had Joe Biden, you had Emmanuel Macron, you had Rishi Sunak, who was at the time Prime Minister of the UK, and others, the President of Germany and Prime Minister of Italy and Greece and Romania and other countries all coming to Israel. On the one hand, to show their solidarity with the state of Israel after the heinous attack, but also to try to pressure Israel not to go in with a major ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. So they were coming to, in a way, to say, okay, we stand with you, but we're coming here specifically to warn you not to do what you're about to do. And Trump, on the other hand, who gave Israel the green lights, gave Israel the weapons, even participated in that strike on Fordo and Natanz with that Operation Midnight Hammer, sending the B-2 bombers to formally and maybe permanently disable Iran's nuclear weapons program. is coming to celebrate the victory and is coming to celebrate the return of the hostages. And when is he doing that? He's doing that on the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. And I do think that there is a couple of real spiritual markers over here. First, that the hostages are coming back 2 years to the day on the Jewish Hebrew calendar from when they were taken. They were taken on the morning of Simchat Torah. They're going to be returned on the eve of the Simchat Torah, Hoshana Rabbah, exactly 2 years to the day on the Hebrew calendar. We know in Judaism, if somebody dies on their birthday, for example, like Moses did, like King David, that's extremely holy and significant.
Right.
So there's definitely spiritual significance here, but also Sukkot was a time when all the nations of the world would actually send diplomatic delegations to Israel to take part in the offerings that were given in temple times. And we haven't seen major world leaders come to Israel on Sukkot, but here you have the leader of the world superpower that stands with Israel coming to Israel on Sukkot, on Hoshana Rabbah, the day in which is also considered to be one of the days of judgment that ties in with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, part of this festival of Sukkot. There's a lot of Jewish mysticism and spirituality behind it. I think we'll leave it at that, but there's definitely a lot of spiritual significance to the visit, and my hope is that the United States will be blessed for their helping Israel throughout all of this war, for all the things that they did, including getting the hostages back, and will be blessed for coming to Israel during this time in a period where I say that the United States needs a lot of spiritual blessing in its own culture war, and hopefully that this trip and the end of the war will also signify a turn in the overall spirit of the United States back towards Israel, which I believe is America's best and most important ally.
It's pretty amazing, a 2,000-year-old practice alive and well today after all this time, and the former President Trump coming during Sukkot, which is the time of our happiness. So please God, things will be happy. But nevertheless, President Trump shut out of the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025. They gave the award to Venezuelan politician Maria Corina Machado for her work in that country. Yet President Trump going away empty-handed for now. Maybe he'll get it in 2026, but he's not walking away with the prize this year.
Well, certainly it's clear that President Trump seemed fixated on the prize. I mean,
No doubt he
he's
wants
talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Since the first visit when Netanyahu met Trump, I was there in the Oval Office, and he was just waxing about that he would never get a Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, you remember that the Abraham Accords were signed back in 2020. Netanyahu and Trump brokered together these incredible peace accords that nobody thought was possible with countries in the Arab world. And the Nobel Committee, they didn't look favorably on that at all, even though it was an astonishing moment of how peace is possible in a war-torn region. And that didn't lead to Nobel Prizes for Trump or for Netanyahu for that.
Yasser Arafat got his, though.
Yeah, Yasser Arafat got his. Barack Obama received the Nobel Prize just 9 months into office as an aspirational Nobel Prize of what could be possible, even though Barack Obama did nothing to bring the war closer to peace. In fact, what did Obama do? He supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He took away sanctions and signed the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal with Iran, which ultimately led, I believe, to this war between Israel and its terror proxies here. So, Obama doing nothing to bring the world closer towards peace, but you see that the committee is not really interested in peace. It's more of a political body. Will Trump get a Nobel Peace Prize next year? I would hope so, but I think that it also could be a signal to Trump that there's more work to be done, and that this deal that has been signed, we haven't even seen the return of the hostages. So meanwhile, I think Jared Kushner was correct what he said last night in Hostage Square, Saturday night, saying, we're not celebrating yet because the hostages are not even home, okay? But we have to see also if Hamas does become demilitarized, if this war actually does end, if Israel actually has to return to striking against Hamas terror positions, and then to also see if these future normalization agreements, the type that President Trump has been boasting about. I mean, he said that this isn't just a ceasefire deal. He said this is a peace deal, and he said that there's many countries that want to be part of peace. So let's see if Syria normalizes relations with Israel, if Lebanon normalizes relations with Israel, if the Saudis normalize relations with Israel, if Indonesia, Pakistan, other nations normalize relations with Israel. So let's just say that the committee knows that Trump wants the prize. Let's see if Trump can do everything in his power over the next 12 months to make certain that the Nobel Prize Committee has no choice other than to give a unanimous vote for a Nobel Peace Prize to President Donald Trump.
I would argue that with the Yasser Arafat receiving the prize, that it's nothing more than a paperweight to put on your desk. But that being said, I understand the significance, and I understand President Trump has been wanting this prize for many, many years now, and I'm almost sure that he's going to get it here down the road. But let's focus on the summit, which you mentioned will be starting perhaps Monday night or Tuesday morning in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, with 20 leaders from around the world, the Arab world, the Muslim world, and President Trump and his team there meeting in Egypt. I guess assuming everything goes according to plan, everything is smooth, the hostages are released, and then you have this meeting with all of these countries. I can list them here. I'm going to skip that. But what's your take on the significance of this meeting? Will this actually lead maybe to that peace deal, which President Trump wants, and part 2 of the Abraham Accords? What's your thoughts on this meeting?
I mean, I think it is important to look at the countries that are supposed to come to this: Germany, France, UK, Italy, Qatar, Emirates, Jordan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Indonesia. So some of the names on these lists have already normalized with Israel. Some seem to be on the short list to normalize with Israel. And then you have Germany, France, UK, and Italy, which are the major 4 powers in Europe. So on the one hand, good that they're all getting on board. On the other hand, look who's not coming to the conference: Israel.
Right.
Okay, so I think that that's important. We don't know what's going to come out of this conference. Meanwhile, there's a 20-point plan, and there are differences of opinion on how this plan is going to get carried out. And like I mentioned earlier, is Israel going to have permission to attack against Hamas installations, weapons movements, organizations of terrorism inside Gaza, as some kind of international stabilization force is created? What does that international stabilization force look like? What is their mandate? Is their mandate to prevent Israel from attacking against Hamas terror installations? Are they going to attack against Hamas installations? Who's going to go in and destroy the tunnels that are still remaining under Gaza Strip? Who is going to go in and confiscate all the remaining rockets and try to take away the assault rifles that Hamas has? Who's going to actually police the Gaza Strip? We already see just in the last 24 hours videos that are allegedly of Hamas operatives killing those that are believed to be collaborators with Israel. Is there going to be some kind of civil war taking place between these factions, like the Abu Shabaab faction and other local factions, which Israel and this international stabilization force are going to work with to try to create some sense of order inside various areas of Gaza? And are they going to be fighting with Hamas? So we don't really know. We don't know what the rebuilding is going to look like. We don't know what the process of inspecting aid coming into Gaza, what that's going to look like. Who's going to do that? Will Israel do that? Will the United States or others do that? It's been reported that the United States may allocate as many as 200 troops to sort of facilitate whatever's going to be the next step in Gaza. Although I saw, according to those reports, that those 200 are not going to be deployed inside Gaza, but rather they would be deployed, I believe, inside Israel or on the Egyptian side of the Gaza border. So, we have to see what all this looks like. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of reasons for optimism about the deal, but there's also a lot of reasons for skepticism about the deal. And we have to just take a look at what comes out of this summit, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to report on next week about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Prime Minister Netanyahu, by the way, saying that Hamas must disarm or the war will resume. Number one, Hamas has said they will not disarm under no circumstance. Secondly, I can't see at this juncture, if the hostages are released, I don't see any scenario that the war resumes unless there's some sort of mega October 7th style attack again, which is not likely with an Israeli military presence surrounding the perimeter there in Gaza. But, what do you think? What do you think it would take for Netanyahu to stick by that? Because Hamas says they're not disarming. So what would it take? With 2 rockets, 5 rockets, 10 rockets? Like, what is the breaking point for Israel to say, okay, we got the hostages back. Now we're going to strike. We don't have to worry about hitting our own hostages. We can go full force into Gaza. What do you think that's going to
I think that's the most important component of this deal, is that the hostages are now suddenly off the table. Okay, the number one card that Hamas had to prevent Israel from moving quickly through Gaza, to prevent Israel from doing things that it maybe you had wanted to do in other scenarios. They weren't able to do it because Hamas was holding the hostages, because they were playing psychological war on the Israelis with the hostages, because they were threatening to kill the hostages. Now that the hostages are off the table, I think that Israel, in some sense, does have a freer hand. And we have to wonder, speculate whether President Trump and his administration have specifically taken these hostages off the table because that's what Israel and the U.S. have discussed in order to allow Israel to go in and to further demilitarize Hamas. And I do think you have to look at what's going on inside Lebanon on a near daily basis as your barometer for what Israel hopes can happen inside Gaza, which means that Israel can strike anytime they see a violation of the ceasefire agreement, provided that they, of course, report that violation, provided that the International Stabilization Force is not able to dismantle that violation itself, that Israel would then be able to go in and just continue to, conduct this strategy of, let's say, not mowing the grass. Israel's mowed the grass, and mowed the entire lawn almost in Gaza, but here to pull up any weeds that come out as they come out. So, I think that that's what Israel hopes will happen. We've seen that until now, Israel and the United States have been on the same page. But the question is now, once you bring in these other players, like the Qataris, like Egypt, like Jordan, like the Saudis, and all these European powers, if they're going to be on board with that. So again, we have to see, what the actual results of this are, what other documents might come out, what the plans for Gaza are for the future. And I think another really important component here is the question of whether Gazans are going to be able to safely leave the Gaza Strip if they want to do that. Because let's say that all these powers come forward and they say, we're going to invest billions of dollars into the rebuilding of Gaza. Well, guess what? Meanwhile, Gazans don't have apartments. There's no hospitals. There's no schools. Okay, they don't have any infrastructure there. And I think that a lot of Gazans would say, what, I'm just going to live in squalor for the next 5, 10 or more years until everything gets rebuilt? No. Meanwhile, let me go someplace else where at least I can get an apartment, where at least I can send my kids to school, where at least there's real food, not just humanitarian aid food, but I could actually go to a store and buy whatever I want, whether that's fresh meat, fresh fish, fresh dairy, whatever it is. I just want to have a normal life, get a job. Like, there's not going to be an economy inside of Gaza for years. So I think for those people that want to be free, of this war-torn region, let's see if they actually get out now as a result of this ceasefire, and let's see if any of these countries that are lining up will be willing to take in Gazans. And there was even a report, I don't know if this is confirmed, but I saw a report that Israel did put pressure on, for example, Prime Minister of Turkey, Erdogan, to take in Gazans now. Let's see if he or other countries are going to be willing to do that.
I saw something similar about Egypt, about putting pressure on Egypt. The conference is being held there. Maybe this is a prelude, if you will, towards Egypt stepping up after all this time and taking in Gazans. Remains to be seen. We'll know more on next week's show. And Alex, finally this week, this probably could have been front page maybe if it wasn't so much else going on here in Israel. Qatari Air Force base to be built in Idaho, USA. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced on Friday the U.S. will allow Qatar to build an Air Force facility at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. Let's check out this video.
The location will be host a contingent of Qatari F-15s and pilots to enhance our combined training, increase lethality, interoperability. It's just another example of our partnership. And I hope you know, Your Excellency, that you can count on us.
So what is going on here? Idaho, USA, Qatar. How does it all fit? Let's bring it home. Let's tie it all together.
Well, we know that the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East is already hosted by Qatar. We know that Qatar has now gifted a plane to be the new Air Force One of the United States to President Trump. And now we see that Qatari fighter jets are going to train alongside U.S. troops in a shared Air Force facility in Idaho. And what we're seeing here is all of a sudden the elevation of Qatar, from what Israel would consider to be one of the world's largest state sponsors of terror, and a country that has been undermining Western and U.S. interests, at universities, in the media, and in other ways in the United States, now is being elevated to one of the most important strategic military partners of the United States. And I think it's troubling. Specifically, the part here that's troubling is that this is related to air power. And what has been Israel's significant technological, qualitative military edge in the Middle East? It's been its dominant air force. Okay. Yes, it's true that Saudis, Egypt, Turkey, they have planes, but they don't have the sort of dominant strategies and dominant fighter pilots and weapon systems of the state of Israel. Now, who knows what weapon systems Israel has? Well, to a large extent, I don't want to say to 100% extent, but to a large extent, the Americans know. Why? Because Israel is using American F-35s, American F-16s, American F-15s, and they often report back on what different changes need to be made to the systems, to the different technological adjustments that Israel is making. If you recall, when Israel struck against Iran, they had basically jerry-rigged the F-35s to carry more fuel so that they would need to be refueled less on these long flight missions. And now you're going to have the Qataris basically training alongside American pilots who may be getting intel from Israel on what they're doing and giving them the skill set that they might need to carry out air battles with the Israeli Air Force. So I think that this is definitely something that Israel needs to look carefully at. I know that the Israeli government is trying to downplay what they see now as an elevated military relationship between Qatar and the United States, but I think that this is really worth keeping a very close eye on.
And we'll do that for you here on Jerusalem Minute. Thanks very much, Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. Josh Haston here, correspondent for JNS. And let's hope for a good week. Only good news ahead as we continue to celebrate the last days of the holiday.
Sukkot is a time of joy. It's called the Zman Simchatenu, the period of the most joy on the Jewish calendar. And I think that if we see the return of the hostages this week during this holiday, there's going to be tremendous joy, which I think is going to do a tremendous spiritual turnaround to the horrific pain and horror we felt 2 years ago at the close of this Sukkot holiday with the attack on October 7th.
Alex, let's hope for good news and true happiness. I want to thank our production team behind the scenes, Yuri Svetsky, Ryan Lifshitz, Zach Sickerman, and Esther Eden. Make sure you go to JNS TV for all the amazing content JNS provides, and go to jns.org, especially now, folks, for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Chag Sameach, happy holidays. We'll see you next week.